Thank you very much, everyone, and looking forward to the discussion today. We have quite a varied panel. Just a quick introduction from each of our guests today. Adrian Youngman from Partisia. Partisia is building a real-world, enabling real-world adoption with a data privacy-focused protocol. Peter Liu from Mantra is also focused on compliance with a layer 1 blockchain, bringing real-world assets online. Belal from Dubai and the Dubai DMCC Crypto Center, which is, by the way, the Middle East and North Africa's largest ecosystem with over 600 Web3 businesses. And last but not least, Johannes Schweifer, who at Core Ledger has been building the token economy operating system to add utility to tokenized assets. So real-world assets, the tokenization of everything, I think most people in the room would agree that the opportunity is huge. And depending on who you ask, the opportunity is either huge, really huge, or massively huge. That means that McKinsey thinks real-world assets could be a $2 trillion business by 2030. BCG thinks it could be $16 trillion, and lately Standard Chartered thinks it could be as much as $30 trillion. So quite big. Now, on the way to get there, of course, the technology is key. So I think it would be good to start with just an example from each of the panelists right now, where we are on the way to 30 trillion, some use cases from your ecosystem, your place, your tech ecosystem. What is being built right now? Johannes, can you start quickly?
Yeah. One example that we are building right now is for fine metal, digital fine gold, tokenization of gold. But of course, it's always about the use case, as I often put in the foreground. And here it's digital transformation. So in order to get rid of the paper, which is a storage certificate, up to date, we introduced tokenization. So it's not really tokenization as you might imagine, because we invented something new, non-fungible assets, which are not transferable, but it's fully compliant. It's not a security token. And as you can imagine, tokenizing gold is a big topic right now. So with inflation looming, I would say this and the tokenization of other liquid assets, such as gems, diamonds, will be a huge business. So there, I agree, there's a huge opportunity.
And Adrian, on Partisia Blockchain, what is being built? Can you give us an example of a use case that is there, that is being developed?
Yeah, absolutely. So Partisia, as you mentioned, is a layer 1 focused on data privacy alongside the public blockchain, so bringing together that private data and the public blockchain. We are trying to kind of enable real-world asset tokenization by helping projects meet real-world expectations around things like compliance, regulation, privacy of confidential information. We have a number of projects that are at a relatively early stage with us. Some of the more established ones include work we're doing with entities like the ICRC, so a committee of the Red Cross, where we're looking at a stablecoin project. It's a use case specific stablecoin to enable disbursements of relief payments to individuals in a way that maintains and protects privacy where required. We also are working with another project that is live, or that's building, that is focused on issuing a stablecoin that is collateralized by a commercial real estate portfolio. And then we've also got some earlier stage conversations around real estate tokenization. But I think one of the more important things that we're doing is trying to make sure that we set the groundwork. So we are also very active contributors to the ERC 3643 token standard to try to define how we can move forward as a sector in a way that does meet the requirements, that leverages the strengths of blockchain, but enables them to be fully compliant. We're also working with projects around decentralized identity, which is going to be one of the key projects in enabling all of this, as well as working with oracles that are bringing in data from the real world in a way that can be integrated with active projects. So there's a number of enablers and then active.
A few elements there. Peter, I give you a chance as well. What's being built with Mantra?
We're working on, I see it in two different sort of buckets. So we work on financial instruments and the tokenization of financial instruments. Mm-hmm. It's a bit of a repackaging, a reformatting of a digital representation of financial instruments. So we've got an aircraft financing deal that we're working on. We've got vaults that kind of bring liquidity in, and it's a play on US treasuries. That's quite a common theme in our space. But apart from that, Mantra is based operationally in Hong Kong, but also applying for a license in Dubai. And we're working with real estate developers in Dubai to tokenize the real estate there. In the month of October, which we are going to call Omtober, which is our native token for Mantra, we're about to announce a series of announcements, one of which is working with native tokenization, so bringing records on-chain so that the token itself isn't a representation of a thing, but becomes the thing itself, representing a legal right. That takes a lot of not just technological work, it takes a lot of structuring and utilizing the technology properly so that it represents a proper legal right. One example is it's been done before. It's not entirely brand new. So Luxembourg share register can be issued directly on chain so that it becomes the actual thing itself and not a representation of the thing.
So you mentioned real estate, you mentioned Dubai, so now we come to Belal. Tell us what else, besides the real estate use case, may be being built in Dubai among the 600 companies, some of whom work in tokenization.
Sure. So at DMCC, we basically sit at the intersection of assets and tokenization. We have 2 million square meters of land, which are the master developer of. We have 87 towers and new towers coming online, so lots of opportunities for real estate tokenization. But also our biggest kind of number of tenants and members is in the commodities trade. So I would say gold tokenization is what we see the most use case of. We helped one company take off the ground last year and tokenize their gold and issue their tokens. We have 5 more as work in progress. There are also some use cases for diamond and copper that is coming along. So very exciting to see the gold obviously take a lot of demand. But also talking about real estate, I mean, what's interesting is currently, of course, the usage or the way that companies are tokenizing is using an SPV layer. But what's interesting is that the Dubai Land Department is actually considering putting the entire register of land on chain and the use of smart contracts then to be able to automatically renew contracts without the use of manual processes. So once that's possible, it's going to actually unlock the potential of being able to fractionalize the ownership of real estate directly without having to use intermediaries. And that's one of the few examples that we have in Dubai.
Very, very interesting. So a broad set of use cases, a lot of it focused around very large markets, gold, real estate, very huge potential. But while we're still on the technology, and those of you who are more focused on the technology, what is still missing in order to really play big time in those big markets? Compliance, data privacy, the share registry. What are some other technical things that still have to be worked out on the way to 30 trillion? I leave it open.
Purpose and the implementation of that purpose. Because what I always say is that people start tokenizing things with the intention to just sell a token. And that's the same with all kinds of assets. But that's the wrong approach, actually. So there must be a purpose why they want to tokenize. What's in it, not just for them, because they want to sell something. What's in it for the people who shall buy the token? Is it saving of transaction fees? Then the whole process must be cheaper. Then it makes sense. Is it a utility purpose, like with real estate, tokenization of, I don't know, some luxury house which you need as a vacation home or something? Then you can not only part own it, you can also part use it. That's a utility purpose, right? I don't need to own an entire building in order to benefit from it without rent, right? And so forth. And then, how to implement it? How to implement a digital lock, for example, for such piece of real estate, or how to, well, close the entire circle from selling to actually utilizing things. Because tokenization alone is not a big challenge. I mean, it's a button press. Right? It gets interesting when we are talking about regulation, how to cleverly
We'll get to regulation, don't worry.
treat regulation. Right? It's important, right? Yeah. So how to maybe bypass some, or how to, okay, I don't want to say bypass, but how to find loopholes in order to use regulation.
Navigate.
I don't like that word either, but go ahead.
Navigate.
Sorry, I don't have a better explanation for it. Just avoiding to fall into a trap. Because if you come with some new business model and ask the regulator, you're stuck for years. From experience. I'm here now since, well, many years. And the experience, it was always the same. New business models, trying to implement them with technical means, get always stuck at the regulator. So finding a simple way how to tokenize things, give things a purpose, and then, of course, you need the technology to implement it.
So would you say translating the needs of regulation and rules and so on into the technology so that
if you
it
want to
works?
put it simply, then yes.
And now we have 3 different, shall we say, technical ecosystems. There are many, many more out there. Lots of things to be tokenized. Is it all going to be tokenized a bit here, a bit there, this, that, gold on this chain, on that chain? What about a harmonized or multipolar tokenized world ecosystem? Belal, what do you think?
I think as much as the kind of convergence and multipolar sounds like a nice ambition, I think tokenization will still happen on independent chains. Because, I mean, all the chains are going to compete to get the liquidity and the users on their chains, and that's what's going to actually keep the value locked within each one. So I think the competition between chains is fierce, and we're going to see new chains also emerge that have a specific focus on RWAs, but I don't see it all happening at one place.
Somebody else have a different perspective?
No, I think it's going to happen iteratively, right? I like using the examples of e-commerce and the onset of the internet, and it happens iteratively. There's a lot of hype in tokenization. I keep on getting asked what the magic bullet is or what the magic solution is. It might be as boring as just slow iterations of different asset classes, different levels of adoption, different ways of solving regulatory challenges as you try to distribute these products. But I like Johannes's point, which is something we focus a lot on, which is tokenizing an asset is as simple as 6 lines of code, my team tells me. It's really easy. I'll say this token belongs to this thing, and that's it, right? But the plumbing behind it, where you have true savings of transactional costs. We attend hackathons, and nobody's focusing on this stuff at all. Making that transactional efficiency a reality is, I think, what we're trying to build on our chain.
Well, actually, we do. So we have the technology.
But you don't do consumerism, Johannes.
But there's one thing I really want to mention in this competition between blockchains. What is not a driving factor with real-world assets is liquidity. Because everybody says, oh, I need to have liquidity. Why? Because, I mean, if you tokenize a real-world asset, it has a value. It doesn't need liquidity in whatever form, because if it gets cheaper, for whatever reason, then people will buy it because it has a real value, right? So you don't need liquidity. I mean, it will automatically balance itself out, so to speak. That's my...
We might come back to that topic just towards the end, but now we've talked about the technical things and use cases and so on here, shall we say, down in the weeds. At the same time, some tokenization is happening very high level. You mentioned financial assets, and there are people in the news, BlackRock, some others who have been now starting to do tokenization at a very large scale, so big companies. Are the institutions going to come and steal the thunder and wipe it all away? Or is there going to be a bottom-up and a top-down move towards 30 trillion of real-world asset tokenization? What do you think?
So I think it will probably depend a little bit on the nature of the assets, and that I think financial assets probably lend themselves to institutions leading the way. But as with most emerging spaces, there's going to be white space for new startups, and I think at its heart there'll be a dance between the emerging players and the institutions, where very often the institutions are key partners for the startups, and I think we'll see both emerging.
I found this one of your hardest questions to prepare for, Jan, because
But I'm sure you have a good answer.
I think the way TradFi behaves, old money stays old money, right? And trades conservative asset classes. And you're trying to marry that up with this really innovative bleeding edge side of tokenization. So, we've had all kinds of projects come to us, racehorses, whiskey, agricultural products. It's hard to translate that liquidity and try to transfer that liquidity into some of these projects. So I think it's got to find its own use case. To Johannes's point, right? If I can buy something in the real world, why on earth would I want to buy a tokenized form of it? There has to be a use case. And someone asked me about the Dubai real estate project we announced recently. I said, well, I can buy this thing just regularly. Why would I need to buy a tokenized form of it? But if you talk about, say, in our example, if you've got a $50 million house, even mass affluent cannot afford that until you fractionalize it, right? So there are some use cases, but you've got to find your own individual pockets of demand, and that's how I think it's going to grow from the grassroots up. But I think it's a bit of a pipe dream to imagine that all of that liquidity coming into the Biddle fund is going to find its way into some startup Web3 project.
I mean, entities like BlackRock, they can just cheat. I mean, if they tokenize equity, that's it, then we're there, right? We are in the trillions.
Yeah.
And then they're just using blockchain technology as a tool, as it actually is meant to be used. Okay, in my world at least, right? If we are talking about things with real use cases again and real purpose, then you need to be inventive, because that's something I always say, but nobody listens to me. Really, at the beginning, in 2017, 18, when there was this huge token hype, there was an incentive to buy these tokens, because those who issued the token said, well, you can buy into my project, and if my project is successful, you can have 10x, 50x. And we have seen it before, right? There were such use cases which actually worked. And then came the people who said, I issue a real-world asset token. Actually, back then they were called asset-backed tokens. And why should this be better than a token which is just hot air? Well, it's backed by real-world assets, right? I mean, it has a value. And then they realized, nobody wants to buy the token. Yeah, really, it was that way. It didn't work. Why did it not work? Because those who like to buy tokens, they buy it for a speculative reason. Because there is no real-world asset backing. You cannot calculate what it's worth. It moves with, I don't know what, the air, the temperature, it's something, sentiment. Goes up 10 times, falls to 0, but exactly this volatility is what gives those tokens, backed on nothing, value, speculative value. Something that is backed by a real-world asset has a constant value. A real estate, I mean, a building, right? It will not rise 10x. Why should it? It can go to 0 if it's, demolished, right? But there's no speculative incentive. So those people who like to buy tokens, the old-fashioned ones, they are not the buyers of real-world assets tokens, because they're not interested in that. It has no speculative incentive whatsoever. And those who like real-world assets, real estate, gold, whatever, they normally don't like the tokenized form, because then they have to care about private keys and all that, and they would prefer a piece of paper. So back to your original question, what is missing? Simplification, safety. For those people who are kind of, in the old world, they like those assets, not just shares, right? Something that has a value for them, but don't really like the technology. For them, we must hide the technology. So it has to get completely transparent, and then they have their old world use case with the advantage of simplicity, money saving with transfer, simplicity of owning something that they cannot afford as a whole, so fragmentation and so forth. And then we could potentially get to 30 trillion.
We'll leave that topic for now, since we have to move on, and we do want to talk about regulation. I just wonder if, going back to the institutional bottom-up versus top-down, maybe the institutional side brings liquidity and demand and distribution, whereas projects like we have here bring the use cases and the work, and they come together, but we'll leave that topic. regulatory topics will not go away. They're present all the time in blockchain and crypto and real-world assets as well. Turning to Bilal, Dubai is very innovative, also attracting projects. Switzerland has been very early. There are other places. Now we have MiCA on the horizon in the EU. Where do you think we are as far as a regulatory harmony is for these kinds of assets? Are we anywhere close?
Not so much harmony.
Okay.
The regulations are quite varying in different jurisdictions, but it's good to see places like Dubai, of course, leading the way in creating a regulatory framework for tokenized assets. Also, as mentioned, Singapore and Switzerland. US is still a difficult place, of course, because they still look at, I think the SEC looks at the tokenized assets as security, right? So that makes it kind of difficult in that space. But what I'm also interested to talk about is the, one thing that regulators are like kind of looking at is the custody of the token, or of the assets themselves and the security. And we have a platform called the DMCC TradeFlow, which regulators love because it's kind of a registry for commodities. So you're able to put the commodity there. We issue an electronic receipt, which is issued by DMCC with a government stamp on it. So that kind of gives safety for the tokenization process to ensure that the quantity and the quality of the commodity is actually set and it's stored in an approved warehouse that is linked to our system. So it's things like that, I think, that supports the ecosystem of tokenization.
Peter, did you have something to add?
I think it's a very challenging topic with regulation, but I think increasingly projects are coming to realize that to do anything at scale, particularly with tokenization, when you're in the bucket of dealing with financial instruments, there is no way to achieve this dream of a completely decentralized, completely libertarian view. To scale up largely, you have to solve your AML and KYC requirements. And there are innovative solutions out there which are making use of blockchain. Underlying just beneath all that KYC layer is data privacy as well, which is something a lot of people are not thinking about in terms of having all of this personal data sit on chain and how you protect that. So I'm hopeful, I'm an optimist that we will eventually solve that regulatory hurdle. But when it comes to traditional financial instruments, like our aircraft financing deal, we're doing it like TradFi regulations based on reverse solicitation or based on accredited investors.
Mm-hmm. Let's move quickly on to a topic going forward, drivers going forward. Again, getting to 30 trillion, like the technical aspects are one thing, the regulation is one thing, but then there's a market, right? These things are there, they are traded, there is liquidity, and people want them. People want to invest in them. Just talk to us about the things that are still missing or that could still be developed in order to make a market, shall we say, for tokenized assets. Is it compliance? Is it data privacy?
So I clearly think it's a big part of it.
Yes.
Just building on that point, I think that the definition of standards is a very important piece. But as you say, that will include, higher requirements, higher expectations than Web3 might traditionally be used to. I think particularly as we look at the opportunities presented by fractionalization and how that can broaden participation and find maybe a middle ground between that traditional token speculators, real-world assets, traditional investors, maybe this broadened participation in some of these traditional assets. But then when you combine that with requirements around things like KYC and AML, suddenly you're having to do that process on a much larger user base. And this is where I see a big opportunity for some of the emerging technology around things like self-sovereign identity and how those could use blockchain to solve that problem better, where people could, for example, self-custody their data. So in the same way that blockchain enabled us to self-custody our money and still interact with this universe of products, what if we could self-custody our data and still meet regulatory requirements and interact with this universe of products? And I think things like that are going to be part of enabling this opportunity to emerge and evolve.
Bilal, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we need more market participants, basically, more exchanges that are open for RWA and investment platforms and banks. And to your point earlier about gold and who can buy it, I mean, in Dubai, we have a great example of a few major banks that have partnered with companies in DMCC, to explore the tokenization through their platforms. And I think that's what's going to bring more users. I mean, the banks have huge number of user bases, and unlocking that potential of those users and bringing them into the RWA world is going to make a big difference.
Johannes, do you want to add something?
I have been very quiet. I was itching. But actually, people have to understand that blockchain technology is just a tool. Different to how it, I mean, for real-world asset tokenization, different to how it was used the years ago with what we call in general cryptos, so native blockchain currencies, cryptocurrencies, etc., and also all those tokens, right? There you could have DeFi, an active DeFi market, because there the self-custody of values really made sense and still does. With real-world assets, you have to realize there are some constraints. The decentralization doesn't really fit to the business model. Exactly as you said, Peter. I mean, it's, and actually you, Adrian, it's this protection of data, which is super relevant, but at the same time, you want to have a public ledger. I mean, it's a public ledger, right? Data would be public. Okay, not in the case of internet computer, for example, there it's encrypted, but nonetheless, I mean, it's still something that needs to be realized that there is a need for centralization in some respect. Also the custody of values. That's central. There's one party being the custodian of real-world assets, having a warehouse, right? And blockchain technology just enables you to easily transfer it. But, I mean, that's not DeFi, right? Because in theory, the central party could say, well, now we lock the warehouse. Or even a rogue state player could say, now we lock up the warehouse. So there is some constraint, and we have to realize that there is this constraint. What all people want to achieve, full decentralization, DeFi, whatever, in my opinion, will never exist in the world of real-world asset tokenization. That's it. And when we realize this, we come up with useful business models.
There's a wonderful phrase, what got us here won't get us there. So we need new innovation, we need new thinking.
And on that note, since we're just about 1 minute from the end of our discussion, 30 trillion is some projection of the market opportunity. Do you think, yes or no, we get there in the next 10 to 12 years?
Yes. And when we get there, we won't even know it. So because the experience won't be defined as a blockchain experience. It'll just be the way you do things. Just like, buying shampoo online now, nobody thinks about it. 25 years ago, you try and do that, everyone thought you were crazy.
True, true. Bilal, you agree?
Definitely, yes. And we're going to play a role in making that happen.
Very good. Johannes?
Definitely, because the dollar is inflating, so we'll definitely reach it.
That will help too.
There you have it. Thank you very much for joining the discussion. It's been very, very interesting. We look forward to seeing what role you will play in getting to 30 trillion for real-world asset tokenization. Thank you for listening, and looking forward to what's to come.
All right. Thank you, Ian. Come on, Jörg. Come with me. Thank you all so much. Thank you for your time. You can go in that direction over there.